The year is 100 AD, and you are standing in one of the most advanced cities on the face of the earth. The streets beneath your feet are perfectly paved stone, laid in dead straight lines, cutting through the noise and the smoke and the chaos of 30,000 people, living and working and trading, shoulder to shoulder all around you. To your left, a bathhouse the size of a city block, steam pouring from the vents. To your right, the roar of a crowd. You follow the sound, and there it is. A stone amphitheatre the size of a football stadium, 6,000 people packed in, watching gladiators fight and die on the sand. This is not Rome. This is not Athens. This is not any city you have ever heard celebrated as a wonder of the ancient world. This is Londinium. Let's start with the thing that tells you immediately what kind of city Londinium was. The Londinium Amphitheatre, built around 70 AD in the first decades of the city's existence, the amphitheatre was a statement, and the Romans knew exactly what they were saying with it. They were saying, we are not leaving, we are not passing through. This is a real city, and real cities have arenas. The outer walls were originally timber, but within a generation they were rebuilt in ragstone, the same hard local stone used for the city walls. And this is important, it tells you that the decision to make this permanent was made early. They were not going to leave it as a wooden structure. They wanted something that would stand for centuries. And from the outside, it is imposing a great curved wall of grey stone rising above the streets. Around it, the arched entrance tunnels cutting through the base on all sides, funneling the crowd in through the vomitoria, the passageways the Romans used to fill and empty their arenas quickly. Inside, the tiered wooden seating rises steeply around an oval sand floor. That floor is not just sand. There is a sophisticated drainage system of channels cut beneath it to carry away water and whatever else accumulated during the spectacles. Gladiatorial combat, beast hunts, the execution of criminals, all of it happening in the sand with 6,000 citizens of Londinium watching from above. The men fighting in that arena came from training schools. The gladiatorial schools the Romans established across the empire, and the crowds who watched them were Londinium citizens, a mixed population of Romans, Gauls, Syrians, North Africans and Britons, all crammed together on those wooden benches sharing the same experience. And for a few hours forgetting that they came from different corners of the world, that was what the amphitheatre was for. It was not just entertainment, it was social engineering. It was Rome telling its subjects that they were all part of the same thing now. And Londinium had one from almost the very beginning, but the arena was only one part of what made this city remarkable. Because what the people of Londinium were producing in their workshops was so sophisticated, it puts most of what you think about the ancient world to shame. Here is something almost nobody knows about Londinium. It was the leather goods capital of the ancient world, not a town where they made shoes, not a region with a tannery tradition, the leather goods capital of the entire known world. And the quality and complexity of what the craftsmen of Londinium were producing was unlike anything being made anywhere else at the time. Along the waterfront and in the workshops clustered near the forum, the leather workers of Londinium were operating at an industrial scale. Hides were coming in from the surrounding countryside, from cattle and deer, processed in the tanneries, using bark tannin and water, then cut and worked into finished goods by specialist craftsmen who had been training in this craft since childhood. And the objects they were producing were extraordinary. The shoes coming out of Londinium were multi-layered structured objects with separate insoles, outsoles and toe stiffeners built in. They were stitched using a technique called turnshoe construction, where the upper is joined to the sole inside out and then turned right way out to hide the seam completely, producing a clean finished object with no visible stitching on the exterior. It requires precision, it requires skill, and it produces a quality of shoe that the ancient world had very rarely seen. The decoration on these objects was not rough or crude. It was delicate cutwork, lattice patterns, geometric openwork, fine strap work on sandals, interlocking shapes punched through the leather, with tools designed for exactly this purpose. These were not work boots for soldiers. They were fashion objects, and they were being made in Londinium in enormous quantities. The workshops were concentrated strategically near the port, where the finished goods could be loaded directly onto ships. and distributed not just across Britain, but potentially back to the continent as well. Londinium was not just consuming Roman goods, it was producing them at a level that could compete with workshops anywhere in the empire. The city sat at the centre of a trade network, stretching from the tin mines of Cornwall to the olive groves of North Africa, and the leather trade was one of the engines driving it. But if the leather industry showed you what Londinium was building above the ground, then what the Romans were engineering beneath the buildings and beneath the streets tells an even more astonishing story, because what they built down there was something that the people living in this city completely took for granted, and that the rest of the world would not rediscover for over 1,000 years. Step inside a wealthy home in Londinium in the year 150 AD, and notice something immediately. The floor is warm, not warm because of a fire burning in the room, warm from beneath the floor itself, radiating heat up through the mosaic tiles into the air of the room constantly, evenly, without any smoke or flame visible anywhere you are standing on. The Romans had invented underfloor central heating, and they had installed it throughout Londinium on a scale that would astonish you. The system was called the hypocaust, from the Latin meaning to heat from beneath. And the engineering behind it is one of those ideas that seems obvious only after someone has already thought of it. A furnace called the praefurnium was built into the outer wall of the building, typically outside, fed by slaves who kept it stocked with wood and charcoal. The hot air and combustion gases from that furnace were channeled beneath the floor. The floor itself was raised up on hundreds of small brick columns called pili, typically 60 to 90 centimetres high, creating a continuous air gap beneath the entire building through which the hot air circulated freely. As that air moved beneath the floor, it also rose up through hollow box tiles built into the walls, heating the walls themselves from the inside so that the entire room became a radiating surface. Not just the floor, but the walls around you as well. The floor above the hypocaust was laid in mosaic tile and concrete materials that absorbed heat and released it slowly, meaning the room stayed warm for hours, even after the furnace was reduced. And then think about what that meant for the bathhouses, the Hug and Hill baths in the south of the city, the Cheapside baths, the Billingsgate baths. These were buildings of enormous scale dedicated entirely to water and heat and the Roman idea of what civilized life looked like. The caldarium, the hot room, the tepidarium, the warm room, the frigidarium, the cold plunge, all of them either heated by hypocausts or maintained at precise temperatures by the control of furnace intensity, and wealthy private homes had them too. The thermal floors, the heated dining rooms, the warm baths attached to the main house. This was not a luxury available only to the governor or the emperor's representative. It was a standard feature of prosperous domestic life in Londinium, a city on the edge of the Roman world, sitting in the grey, damp cold of the British climate, and the Romans had built it to be warm from the inside out. That was Londinium, and that warmth ran through the whole city, not just through its floors, but through its streets, through its markets, through its port, through its endless movement of people and goods and ideas. And all of that movement, all of those people, all of that activity produced something the Romans had to deal with, and how they dealt with it is the next extraordinary piece of this story. 30,000 people living in one place is 30,000 people producing waste every single day. And if you do not have a plan for that waste, you do not have a city, you have a catastrophe. The Romans had a plan. Running beneath the paved streets of Londinium was a network of drains, a real engineered sewerage system designed to move waste away from the population and into the Thames. The drains were not open ditches or simple channels dug in the earth. They were enclosed, timber-lined culverts, rectangular in section, built from oak planks, jointed carefully with timber base plates running beneath the road surfaces of the city, aligned with the street grid, and carrying both surface runoff from rain and the outflow from the buildings above. The system was hierarchical, the way all good engineering is. Smaller branch drains running beneath the side streets, fed into larger collector drains beneath the main roads, the Decumanus Maximus, the great east-west road through the city, the Cardo Maximus running north-south, and those larger mains carried everything down toward the Thames and out of the city. The Forum, the bathhouses, the amphitheatre, all of the major public buildings had drains feeding into this network, meaning the most important and most heavily used civic spaces in Londinium were producing waste that was immediately channeled away from the people using them, and the Romans did not just build the system and leave it, they maintained it. We have evidence of the drains being periodically cleared, relayed, repaired, the timber lining replaced when it began to deteriorate. This was civic infrastructure in the fullest sense of the term. It required organisation, it required workers, it required someone in the governor's administration who was responsible for making sure the drains of Londinium kept working. 30,000 people going about their daily lives in relative cleanliness in a city on the edge of what the Romans considered the civilized world, because someone had built the infrastructure to make that possible and connected to all of that, all of the drains and the baths and the city's daily life. But none of those systems existed in isolation. And before we talk about the water that fed all of it, we need to talk about what was paying for everything. The port of Londinium was the engine that powered the entire city. And without it, nothing else you have heard about in this video would have existed. The Thames in the Roman period was a wide, navigable tidal river, and the Romans had engineered the Londinium waterfront to exploit it completely. Massive timber wharves projected out into the river, supported on piles, driven deep into the riverbed, and decked with heavy oak planking. These were not small landing stages. They were industrial quays stretching along the north bank of the Thames for hundreds of metres, capable of receiving large ocean-going vessels coming directly from the continent and unloading their cargo straight onto the waterfront of the city. And the operation ran day and night. Behind the wharves stood the Haria, the great warehouse buildings where imported goods were stored before being distributed into the city. Enormous timber and stone structures with wide loading doors opening onto the quayside. Inside them, the cargo of the Roman world was stacked and sorted. Amphorae of olive oil from Spain, fish sauce from North Africa, wine from Gaul, and the Rhine Valley Samian ware, the fine red tableware that wealthy Romans across the empire ate their meals from. Pottery, glass, spices, grains, salt, metalwork, raw materials of every kind, all of it arriving constantly into Londinium, and finished goods, leather, copper, tin, going back out in return. The cranes and lifting equipment on the wharves were working constantly because the ships were arriving constantly, because the demand of a city of 30,000 people never stopped. And it was this port that made Londinium what it was. Within about 50 years of its founding, the city had overtaken the older Roman town of Camulodunum and become the capital of the entire province of Britannia, the seat of the governor, the financial centre of the island. And the reason for that rise was trade. The port made Londinium rich, and that wealth funded everything: the forum and the basilica, the governor's palace, the public baths, the temples, the amphitheatre, the road network spreading out from the city, the hypocaust systems, the sewers, the city walls. All of it was paid for by the goods flowing through those wharves. Londinium was Rome's commercial gateway into Britain, and its port was the beating heart of the entire operation. And to keep all of those people and all of that industry functioning, there was one last piece of infrastructure without which none of the rest of it worked. Every bathhouse in Londinium needed water every day. Every drain needed water to carry its waste. Every fountain, every tannery, every household, every workshop, every cookshop and tavern in a city of 30,000 people needed fresh, clean water constantly. And not a small amount of it. The Huggin Hill baths alone would have required thousands of gallons a day just to fill and replenish the pools. So how did Londinium supply it? The Romans built an aqueduct. Water was brought into the city from the higher ground to the north, where springs and clean streams could be captured and fed into a gravity-driven supply system that delivered fresh water down into the city and distributed it throughout the streets and buildings below. Once inside Londinium, the water was moved through a network of wooden pipes, box pipes made from sections of hollowed oak, bored through the centre and joined end to end with iron collars. These pipes ran beneath the streets of the city, branching off to supply the public fountains, the bathhouses, the workshops, and the homes of the wealthy. The public fountains, called nymphia, were important, not just practically, but symbolically. They were built at key points throughout the city, and anyone could come to them to draw water. The citizens, the slaves, the workers, the merchants passing through, all of them drinking water that had been brought from clean springs outside the city and delivered to within walking distance of wherever they were. The bathhouses were the biggest consumers at the top of the network. The huge quantities of water they required flowing through the system continuously, the heated pools being replenished, the cold plunges refreshed, the drainage from the baths feeding into the sewer network beneath the streets and out to the Thames, and running beneath all of this was the Walbrook, a small river that flowed through the centre of Londinium from north to south before emptying into the Thames. The Romans managed it carefully, channeling it in places, using it to supplement the water supply and integrating it into the drainage network of the city so that the natural hydrology of the site and the engineered infrastructure worked together. Fresh water coming in, wastewater going out, the city breathing like a living thing, supplied and drained and supplied again day after day for 300 years. That was what Londinium was. An arena, heated floors, engineered sewers, a clean water supply, an industrial port, a leather trade that rivaled anything in the empire, all of it running in a city on the edge of the known world. And then the Romans left, the pipes rotted, the drains silted up, the hypocaust went cold, the wharves decayed into the river, and 30,000 people dissolved into the ruins of a city. Londinium was Rome's most advanced city, and for a very long time the world forgot it was ever there.